There were and are important differences in the two dominant monotheistic religions, Islam and Christianity. Despite the chaos and poverty, the Christian world of Western Europe had things the Muslim world did not have, nor did any other culture of that day. Both slavery and polygamy, along with the prevalence of harems and in general an extreme subjugation of women, were accepted practices in the Islamic world, sanctified by the Koran. Feudal Buddhist and Confucian societies in China, Japan, and Southeast Asia were also known for brutal slavery, for huge harems, and routine subjugation of women. And the world of Hinduism in India not only had slavery and polygamy, it also sanctioned child brides, an especially rigid caste system, and the burning of widows. Well, the Christian world inherited the practice of slavery from the Roman Empire, but spurred by Christian doubts, it was gradually abolished, however, until for the most part it disappeared in Western Europe by late medieval times. Like all feudal societies, the medieval Christian world was male-dominated. However, it did not sanction or practice polygamy, child brides, burning of widows, or routine and extreme subjugation of women. And the Christian world of medieval days also had the beginnings of a new idea, the separation of church and state. Jesus had said, "Give unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." In matters of religion, the Pope was supreme, but in matters of all else, the feudal king or queen, even though ruling by divine right, was supreme, and the king's law owed as much to the precedents of Roman law as it did to Christian church law. In Islam, on the other hand, there was no distinction between church and state. They were the same thing and had to be governed by the same laws, the laws of Sharia, as written down in the sacred book, the Koran, and codified and interpreted by Islam's clerics. Another great divide between the two monotheistic religious cultures opened up in the 14th to the 18th centuries, just a few hundred years ago. The Western Christian world went through a Renaissance, a Reformation, and an Enlightenment. The Islamic world did not. And this Western road was the one that eventually led to modern free market capitalism and to liberal democracy. The Islamic road has so far made only limited progress in moving beyond feudal economies and religion-dominated states. What happened in the Renaissance, Reformation, and Enlightenment that was so important to democracy today? Differences between Islam and Christianity intensified in 14th century Italy in the beginning of what is called the Renaissance. Scientists like Galileo, Copernicus, and Vesalius made dramatic progress in astronomy, physics, and medicine. Merchants in Venice, Genoa, and Milan made dramatic progress in trade and financial management. Artists like Michelangelo, Botticelli, and Leonardo da Vinci made dramatic progress in the visual and architectural arts. And a little later, writers like Dante, Cervantes, and Shakespeare laid foundations for modern Western literature. Paradoxically, they made this progress both building upon and in spite of their Christian backgrounds. I say building upon because they did inherit a rich medieval Christian tradition of individualism, of technology advances, of separation of church and state, of respect for women, of rejection of slavery, of advances in logic and reasoned argument in the universities, and the beginnings of a kind of Christian capitalism in the monasteries of medieval Europe. But I say in spite of, because often the church hierarchy was intimately entwined in feudal politics, was a major player in the dominant elite class, was a major landowner in feudal Europe, and was often corrupt, and was usually opposed to trade with enemies and in general to changes in the status quo. The church was also content to have the people illiterate, and thus dependent on the clergy for knowledge and guidance in all religious, scientific, and political matters. In 1517, the church hierarchy had a severe jolt when a monk named Martin Luther nailed what he called 95 Theses onto a church door in Germany, and this was the beginning of what is called the Reformation. Reacting and rebelling against what they considered enormous corruption within the Catholic Church, leaders and groups all over Northern Europe split away from the Church and established what came to be called Protestant churches. In reaction, the Roman Church launched a counter-reformation, and the stage was set for long-lasting violent conflicts. Over the next century, Northern Europe especially was savaged in a long series of religious wars between Protestant and Catholic villages, cities, and feudal kingdoms. One of the worst was a 30 Years' War in what is now northern Germany, when mainly mercenary armies, some on the Catholic side and some on the Protestant side, led to the deaths of up to 1/3 of the total population and the devastation of the human environment. Well, this Reformation, violent as it was, did bring some new ideas into the Western world, and just as important, found a new way to get them distributed. That new way of distribution was the invention of movable type and the printing press. Before the printing press, Bibles, indeed all books, were rare and treasured items, only available in a few monasteries, churches, or universities. A book cost more than a house. Cambridge University, for instance, one of the richest universities in the world, owned a total of 122 books in 1424. And before the printing press, most people in Europe and elsewhere, including kings, queens, priests, and nobles, were illiterate. Well, the first book printed on the new invention was the Christian Bible. Within a few years, there were printing presses in more than 110 European towns and cities. Protestant reformers printed and distributed large numbers of Bibles, encouraged people to learn to read and then to read the Bible for themselves. Protestant's central message was a return to early days of Christianity, where it was the individual's relationship with God that mattered, not his or her relationship with the traditional church. Along with this religious message, Protestant thought and practice eventually led to a gospel of individual authority that encouraged the further development of nationalism, of humanism, and of capitalism in the Western world. This message was especially potent in the New World of the United States and Canada, as were the messages derived from a major happening in the 17th and 18th century called the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was centered in England and Northern Europe, and then a little later in the New World, what would later become the United States of America. It was led by a new breed of intellectuals, philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau in France, Thomas Hobbes, David Hume, and John Locke in England, Immanuel Kant in Germany. He was the one who coined the term Enlightenment, and Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, and Alexander Hamilton in the New World of America. These radical new thinkers disagreed about many things, but they were united in their rejection of feudal politics and of other worldly religions as guides to human governance. Instead, they put their confidence in human experience and in natural reason as the keys to happiness and to a just society. "We hold these truths to be self-evident," wrote Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence in 1776, "that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Like the English Enlightenment philosophers who were Jefferson's mentors, this was religion still, but it was a radical new variation of Christianity called deism. Deism, while acknowledging a supreme being and staying in the Christian tradition, strongly stressed human rights and values and rejected theological dogmas. And this was the religion of most of America's founding fathers, including Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and Thomas Jefferson. And it heavily influenced both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, particularly in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, called the Bill of Rights. All of these men attended Christian church services. Their religious beliefs, however, differed from those of earlier Protestants and Catholics. Influenced by the English Enlightenment, they believed strongly in humanistic Christian values, like love thy neighbor as thyself, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, help the poor and downtrodden, comfort the afflicted, do good and avoid evil, nourish and protect the family, and so forth. Just as important, however, they did not believe that heretics should be banned or burned, nor did they believe that only one religion was the true religion or had a privileged path to God. They did believe in prayer and in life after death, but they did not stress these aspects of Christianity. Instead, they believed strongly in freedom of religion and in tolerance for all beliefs, including atheism. Jefferson was accused of being an atheist, and Thomas Paine was an acknowledged atheist. They also believed in separation between church and state. Give unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they wrote it into the Constitution in the form, Congress shall make no law restricting freedom of religion. Jefferson went further in his writings, recommending a wall of separation between religion and state. Now, by no means did everyone in the new United States share this deist religion and philosophy of the Founding Fathers. Many, probably most, held firmly to more traditional Protestant or Catholic views, while many had no religion at all. Well, this wall of separation has led to a remarkable flowering and an incredible variety of religious beliefs in the United States throughout its history, including today in the 21st century. There are still strong churches of Roman Catholic persuasion, many varieties of traditional Protestant churches, and new megachurches of non-denominational theology, but charismatic and evangelical persuasion, Jewish synagogues, Muslim mosques, Hindu temples, Scientology meeting places, Native American sweat lodges, and more. And then the 20th and early 21st century has also seen the birth of some, you could call them near religions. That is, individuals and groups who believe passionately in causes that they look on as all-important, causes that for their true believers, like traditional religion, permeate, color, and influence all their thought and behavior. Among these secular near religions of the 20th and 21st centuries would be nationalism, communism, Nazism, New Age religions of many varieties, Scientology, and some would add radical feminism and radical environmentalism. Like major religions of the past, at their best, each of these new religions offer grains of truth, but like major religions of the past, at their worst, they also tend to foster absolutist beliefs that brook no disagreement, sometimes so all-encompassing that they cripple thought and lead to emotionally charged action that is counterproductive to human progress. In 1779, the United States was the first and only liberal democracy on earth. To be sure, it was seriously flawed. Slavery in the Western world, at least, seemed to be extinguished in the Christian Middle Ages, but it made a serious and especially brutal comeback in the 17th and 18th centuries, as Africans were kidnapped, crammed into the holds of sailing ships, and sold into slavery in both North and South America. The U.S. Constitution itself was ratified with a provision that slaves counted only as 3/5 of a person. Now, some religious groups, like the Quakers in Pennsylvania, had long fought against slavery as an abomination against God. Other religious groups, however, argued that slavery had support in the Bible and was a part of the natural order of things. And so it was with other social issues of the 19th and 20th centuries in the United States and in the rest of the liberal democratic world, where laissez-faire capitalism might allow callous exploitation of workers. Religion-derived humanistic values would curb this exploitation and encourage laws to protect workers, to provide Social Security, unemployment insurance, and welfare benefits to the poor. Where laissez-faire capitalism might allow discrimination, religion-derived humanistic values have intervened to outlaw discrimination by race, color, or creed, or sexual orientation. But again, to be fair, there are dark sides of some religious influences. Just as some religious groups in the 18th and 19th centuries supported slavery, so some religious groups in the 20th century supported racial segregation and discrimination using arguments from the Bible. For the most part, few, if any, of these Christian groups still support racial segregation today. However, many Christian groups still support discrimination based on sexual orientation, and many still adhere to a biblical view of male supremacy. So too in science, religion-derived humanistic values encourage inquiry today and support scientific investigation of the unknown, even if it does not seem to have any practical economic value. On the other hand, many traditional Christians oppose some areas of science that seem to challenge biblical authority. Evolution is one important example. And new work in biotechnology is also coming under attack from religious fundamentalists, as well as from some radical environmentalists. Considering this long history of religion and democracy, well, what can we say about the connections today? Let's go back to the maps at the beginning of this program. Here is the map of world religions today. Here is a map of world democracies today. The nations with Christian backgrounds, both Catholic and Protestant, as you can see, are for the most part democracies today. The United States, Canada, the British Isles, all of Europe, Scandinavia, Australia, New Zealand, and most of South America, all of these nations came to democratic political structures with their accompanying electoral politics, civil liberties and civil rights, liberal values, and free market capitalist economies through the historical paths cited here. Some of them, like Germany, Spain, Italy, and Portugal, suffered through a desperately painful and shameful period in the 20th century called fascism and Nazism, in which religious values, indeed all human values, were denied and trampled upon. And sad to say, religious leaders of all major religions in Germany, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, for the most part, did not distinguish themselves in defending human dignity. Some other Christian countries, like Russia, Cuba, Poland, and Hungary, suffered through a desperately painful and shameful period in the 20th century when a secular religion called communism came to power and proceeded to trample upon humanistic religious values, indeed all human values. Now, other countries, too, like the United States and much of South America, had to pass through shameful times before they abolished slavery and gave equal rights to African Americans. In this case, leaders like Abraham Lincoln, the many abolitionists of the 19th century, and Martin Luther King and his followers in the 20th century were motivated in great measure by strong humanistic religious beliefs. As our maps of world religions compared to world democracies today show, There are some democracies today, however, that do not have a Christian history. Two major non-Christian countries, Japan and India, are vibrant democracies today. And many smaller non-Christian countries in Asia, Africa, and Southeast Asia also have democratic governments today. In fact, some analysts think the largest non-Christian country of all, China, is moving in that direction. China has embraced free market capitalism, is progressing economically at an unprecedented pace, but it is still governed by a communist party that is not democratic in idea or practice. Muslim countries, for the most part, are not democracies, though there are exceptions here too. Indonesia, for instance, has more Muslims than any other country and is democratic, even if shakily so. Pakistan and Afghanistan are Muslim in religion, and they are haltingly moving toward democracy. India has a very large Muslim population and is solidly democratic. So why has democracy proved so powerful, and why is it spreading so rapidly in the late 20th and early 21st century, even to countries that had little or no experience with Christianity, nor with the Renaissance, Reformation, or Enlightenment? Good questions. No one knows for sure. Here is one answer. As stated in the beginning of this program, democracy has three principal supports: science, capitalism, and humanistic religion. Well, religion is the most universal, the most controversial, and the one most difficult to evaluate. Throughout human history, religious beliefs, rituals, and behaviors have been the inspiration for some of the world's greatest art. Dance, theater, poetry, music, literature, and architecture have all been closely allied to religion in all cultures, in all regions, and in all ages. And throughout human history, religious beliefs, rituals, and behaviors have also been the inspiration for some of the world's greatest humanitarians. Hospitals, care for the young and elderly, comfort for the afflicted, hope for the despairing, relief for the poor and disabled, all these and more have been triumphs of religious compassion. Unfortunately, religious beliefs have also supplied motivations for some of the world's worst atrocities. In almost every case, these religious beliefs did not stand alone, nor were they the only causes, but they did add a critical ingredient of passion and commitment that made the atrocities all the worse. Heretic burnings, crusades, 30 Years' War, Jewish persecutions, Shiite versus Sunni, Catholic versus Protestant, Christian versus Muslim, Christian versus Jew, communist versus fascist, Islam versus the West. In every case, the passion that powered the atrocities seemed to come from a conviction that only one way is the right way, only one religion is the true religion, only one way of life is the right way of life. Democracy has flowered when the humanistic versions of religion, like the deism of our founders, have been stronger, and the absolutist versions, often based on literal readings of books like the Bible or the Quran, have been weaker. This kind of absolutism also includes secular religions like Marxism, nationalism, Nazism, and fascism. Well, who will prevail in the 21st century? No one can be sure. The weight of evidence from the past and the overwhelming surge of the present seem to many of us to point to the eventual worldwide triumph of humanistic religion, free market capitalism, and liberal democracy. But the weight of history also shows it will not be simple or easy and may take a while, maybe a long while. Without question, there could be serious and long-lasting reversals as they were in the past century, when secular religions like communism, Nazism, and racism caused such human misery and catastrophe. As to how democracy will triumph, again, no one can be sure. But some scholars point to modern tools of communication as the key agents of change today. Just as the printing press played such a major role in the birth of liberal democratic ideas in the Reformation and the Enlightenment in Europe, so the revolution in communication technology today, radio, television, computers, cell phones, internet, seem to have favored democracy in the past century and will also, in the long run, in the opinion of most experts, favor the spread of science, of capitalism, of humanistic religion, and of democracy in the 21st century.